What if the greatest military genius America ever produced was also its most dangerous liability, and the men at the top knew it, feared it, and could never quite control it? If you've ever wondered what really happened behind the closed doors of the Allied command in the final months of World War II, if you've ever wanted to know what Truman actually said when the tension between order and genius finally reached its breaking point, then stay with this story until the very end, because what unfolded between these men was not just military history, it was a collision of egos, ambitions, and iron wills that shaped the world we live in today. Subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss stories like this one. Give this video a like if you believe the untold chapters of history deserve to be heard. Share it with someone who loves real history, not the sanitized version, and drop a comment below telling us something you didn't know before watching. Your reactions make this channel what it is. George Smith Patton Jr. was not a man who waited. He was not built for patience, for diplomacy, or for the careful choreography of coalition warfare. By the summer of 1944, he had already been sidelined once. Suspended, humiliated, and publicly condemned after the infamous slapping incidents in Sicily in August 1943, when he struck 2 hospitalized soldiers, calling them cowards in front of nurses and officers alike. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, had been forced to issue a formal apology on Patton's behalf and keep him out of active command for nearly a year. It was a punishment that ate Patton alive. He wrote in his diary with barely concealed rage, convinced that fate had robbed him of his destiny. But fate, as Patton understood it, had a way of correcting itself. When Patton was finally given command of the Third Army in August 1944, just weeks after the Normandy landings of June 6, he was unleashed like something caged too long. In a matter of weeks, his armored columns swept across France with a speed that stunned even his closest subordinates. By late August, the Third Army had advanced further and faster than almost any ground force in the history of modern warfare. Patton captured Brittany, crossed the Seine, and by September his forces stood at the German border, only to be halted. Not by the enemy, by the supply chain. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, and Eisenhower himself made the decision to prioritize Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group in Operation Market Garden. Patton's fuel was cut. His tanks sat idle. And that is where the real story begins. Patton did not simply accept the halt. He was constitutionally incapable of it. What followed was a series of deliberate, calculated acts of insubordination disguised as military initiative, and historians have spent decades arguing over exactly how conscious and premeditated those acts were. Patton continued advancing even after his fuel allocations were cut, ordering his men forward on reserve tanks and captured German supplies. He reported to Bradley that his army had been stopped when in fact it had not fully stopped at all. He pushed patrols forward, seized bridgeheads, and created facts on the ground that made it politically and militarily costly to pull him back. Every delay that came down from SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Patton turned into a statement, a refusal, a performance of impatience that said, louder than any memo could, that the high command was making a catastrophic mistake by holding him back. Eisenhower saw it. Bradley saw it. And neither man knew quite what to do with a general who was simultaneously their most effective weapon and their most persistent headache. Eisenhower's strategic vision for the fall of 1944 was a broad front approach. Advance on all lines simultaneously, prevent any single salient from overextending, maintain Allied unity. Patton's vision was a knife thrust straight into the heart of Germany. He believed, with the certainty of a man who had studied every great military campaign in history, that a single concentrated drive through the Saar could end the war before Christmas 1944. He said it publicly. He said it to his officers. He said it in letters that he knew could be read. When Eisenhower finally met with Patton at Verdun on December 19, 1944, just 3 days into the Battle of the Bulge, and asked him how quickly he could turn 3 divisions 90 degrees north and attack the German flank, Patton replied without blinking, 48 hours. The room fell silent. Even Eisenhower, who had seen almost everything, paused. Now, if you are watching this and you have not yet subscribed to this channel, this is the moment to do it, because we are about to enter the part of this story that almost no mainstream account tells fully, the part where political power, presidential authority, and the question of what America would become after the war began to press down on these men like a weight none of them had fully anticipated. Subscribe right now, like this video so more people can find it, share it with a friend who thinks they know the story, and leave a comment below. What details surprised you most so far? Your comments shape the stories we tell next. The Battle of the Bulge changed everything. When the Germans launched their massive Ardennes offensive on December 16, 1944, punching through Allied lines with 25 divisions and nearly 1,000 tanks, the Allied command was caught badly off guard. It was Patton who moved fastest. True to his word, within 48 hours he had pivoted the Third Army, broken the German encirclement at Bastogne by December 26, and begun rolling back the German advance. The relief of Bastogne became one of the most celebrated moments of the entire war. Patton was hailed as a savior. Eisenhower privately credited him as indispensable. But even in the moment of triumph, Patton was already looking ahead, and what he was looking at frightened those around him in ways that went far beyond the battlefield. By early 1945, Patton had begun speaking openly about something that went beyond his disagreements with Eisenhower over military strategy. He was talking about the Soviet Union. As the Red Army swept westward and the Allied armies drove eastward, Patton expressed in private conversations, letters, and diary entries a conviction that alarmed every senior officer who heard it. That the real enemy was not Germany, but the Soviet Union, and that the Western Allies should use the existing momentum of the Wehrmacht's collapse to push east and confront Stalin before the Soviets could consolidate their grip on Eastern Europe. In March 1945, as the Third Army crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim on March 22, a full day before Montgomery's far more publicized and elaborate crossing, Patton called Bradley in the middle of the night, barely able to contain his excitement, saying, "Brad, don't tell anyone, but I'm across." He was jubilant, competitive, and already thinking 10 moves ahead. Harry S. Truman had become president on April 12, 1945, following the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and he inherited not only a war but a command structure full of barely suppressed tensions. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Patton was appointed military governor of Bavaria, and almost immediately began making decisions that sent shockwaves back to Washington. He was slow to remove former Nazis from administrative positions, arguing that practical governance required experienced officials regardless of their political past. He made comments at a press conference on September 22, 1945, comparing the Nazi Party to Democratic and Republican Party affiliation, remarks so tone-deaf and politically explosive that Eisenhower, now operating in a world of post-war politics rather than wartime necessity, had no choice but to act. Truman, who had been watching Patton's post-war behavior with mounting concern, was reportedly furious. According to multiple accounts from aides present at the time, Truman made clear that Patton had become a political liability that the administration could not afford to carry. Eisenhower relieved Patton of command of the Third Army on October 2, 1945, reassigning him to the largely ceremonial 15th Army, tasked with compiling the official history of the war. It was, by any measure, a humiliation. Patton knew it. His diary entries from this period are among the most raw and emotionally unguarded documents in American military history. He wrote of betrayal, of being used and then discarded, of watching lesser men rise while he was pushed into irrelevance. He spoke to close friends about resigning his commission and returning to civilian life to speak his mind publicly. On December 9, 1945, outside Mannheim, Germany, Patton was involved in a low-speed automobile collision. The injuries seemed minor at first, a fracture to his cervical spine, but he was paralyzed from the neck down. He died 12 days later, on December 21, 1945, in Heidelberg, never having returned to American soil. He was 60 years old. What Truman said when Eisenhower realized that Patton had been turning every delay into a statement was not one sentence, not one meeting, not one decisive moment. It was the cumulative weight of a years-long reckoning with the question that haunts every institution that produces someone truly extraordinary. What do you do with a force of nature that cannot be fully controlled, only aimed? History did not give Patton the war against the Soviets he believed was coming. History did not give him the final charge he believed was owed to him. What history gave him instead was a lonely reassignment, a quiet road outside Mannheim, and 12 days of paralysis in a hospital bed in Heidelberg. If the story moved you, if it made you think differently about the gap between genius and power, between the men who fight wars and the men who manage them, Then please subscribe to this channel right now. There are dozens of stories like this one waiting for you here. Like this video so the algorithm brings it to people who deserve to hear it. Share it with someone who loves history told the way it actually happened. And leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most, or what you want us to cover next. The real history is always more dramatic than the myth. And that is exactly why we are here.